So I was sitting here the other day, not doing much of anything in particular, and I noticed something small, something that used to bother me. It didn't bother me today. It just sat there, ordinary, like it had always been part of the furniture of my life. And that got me thinking about how things slide. There's this old story about a frog. If you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, you immediately hop out and save himself. But if you put him in a pot of lukewarm water and slowly turn up the heat, something different happens. The frog swims around contentedly for a while, even enjoying the balmy water. As the temperature rises, he becomes more groggy and more lethargic until finally he dies. The frog may have not known it, but he was a victim of a slow boil scenario. A slow boil is a structure that leads to poorer and poorer performance and lower expectations, or in the frog's case, higher and higher temperature. That's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell. Everything is acceptable if you do it slowly enough. Not because people are stupid. Well, not even because they don't care. It's just because the change never arrives as a single sharp event. It arrives as a series of almost reasonable adjustments, each one small enough that resisting it feels more trouble than it's worth. And then one day, you look around and the original situation is gone. No one can quite remember when it left. I keep coming back to the personal version of this first, because that's the one I can feel in my own body. Standards don't collapse overnight. They erode. You skip one day of whatever you used to do, exercise, sleep at a decent hour, keeping the place even vaguely clean, calling someone back, reading something longer than a paragraph. One skipped day is nothing, a week is still nothing, a month starts to feel like a pattern, but by then you've already started explaining it to yourself. This is just a busy period. I'll get back to it when things settle. Things never settle, by the way. That explanation becomes the new default, and eventually you stop explaining. It just is. This is how I am now. The moment it hits you, the hardest is when you catch a glimpse of the earlier version of yourself and realize you would have rejected the current one. Not hated, just rejected. Found it unacceptable. And yet, here you are, living inside it without much protest. A quiet, slow shift. It rewrites what counts as normal while you're still living in the middle of the rewrite. The psychology of it is almost elegant in how thoroughly it works against you. Your brain is built for habituation. It recalibrates. The new level becomes the baseline. After a while, the old level starts to feel extreme, almost unnatural. You don't experience the full distance between where you started and where you are. You only experience the tiny steps, and each step is easy to dismiss. Cognitive dissonance does the rest. It's cheaper emotionally to adjust your expectations than to keep fighting a change that never presents itself as a fight. There's no single day you can point to and say, this is the moment it became unacceptable. Without that clear threshold, resistance is nothing solid to grab onto. Fatigue finishes the job. Constant small adaptations weigh you down. Eventually, you stop noticing that you're adapting at all. You can see the same pattern in the smaller cultural stuff that surrounds us in everyday life. Attention is the obvious one. People used to sit with full albums, long books, films that asked for uninterrupted time. Then shorter forms arrived, then shorter still, clips, fragments. The complaint about short attention spans became background noise, and eventually a lot of the people who once made the complaint started producing the exact content they used to criticize. Not because they suddenly decided it was good, but because the environment shifted under them and the new environment rewarded the new form. The old standard didn't die in a dramatic confrontation, it just became less and less practical until it felt almost eccentric to insist on it. Social norms took the same trend, manners, speech, public behavior, things that would have registered as rude or extreme a generation earlier settle into the ordinary. Not because the community voted them in, because each small deviation met less resistance than the last, and the baseline moved. People who try to hold to the older line start sounding like they are the ones out of step. The friction of insisting becomes greater than the friction of accepting, so most people accept. Consumer life also had an identical path. Quality, durability, the basic expectation that things should work and last and someone who help you when they don't. Those expectations didn't vanish in a single season. They thinned out. Prices climb, the products get a little flimsier, customer service becomes a little harder to reach. Each change is small enough to rationalize. That's just how it is now. Everything costs more. No one answers the phone anymore. After enough of those almost reasonable adjustments, the original standard is gone and the new one feels like the only one that ever existed. The larger systems run on the same principle, only with more people and more money involved. Policy and institutional change rarely arrives as one clean, irreversible decision. It arrives as a series of temporary measures, minor adjustments, pilot programs, emergency provisions that somehow never fully expire. Each step can be defended on its own narrow terms. Taken together, they produce a landscape no one quite voted for. The people implementing the changes often understand the method better than the public does. Sudden, visible overhauls trigger resistance. Gradual ones disperse it across time so that no single moment ever gathers enough force to push back effectively. Economic realities work the same way. Housing costs, wages relative to the cost of living, the quiet normalization of debt. The goalposts move slowly enough that each new cohort treats the worst situation as the natural starting point. People who remember an earlier arrangement sound like they are describing a different country. The ones who never knew it have nothing to compete against, so the current arrangement feels like the only possible one. The shift never has to justify itself all at once. It only has to justify small increments. Technology and the quiet expansion of tracking and expectation follow the identical path. Features arrive as a convenience. Each one is useful on its own. Together, they redraw the boundary of what is normal to monitor, to share, to accept as the price of participation. By the time the full picture is visible, the earlier boundary has already been forgotten. People who try to insist on it are treated as the unreasonable ones. The reason the method works so well is simple. Sudden change creates a clear before and after. It gives people a target. It organizes opposition. Moral outrage is something solid to attach to. Gradual change never gives you that. The resistance is spread so thin across months and years that it never reaches critical mass. By the time enough people notice, the new state has already become the reference point for the next generation. Children grow up inside the adjusted world and treat it as the floor. The method itself is effective. It doesn't require everyone to be passive or indifferent. It only requires that the change stay below the threshold of decisive reaction. Even awareness doesn't automatically solve it. Once you see the pattern, pointing it out often gets filed under overreaction or nostalgia. The nostalgia charge is even especially strange when you're not old enough to have lived through some of the better era. This is all you've known. The earlier standard exists only as stories or data points, not as lived memory. Trying to hold to that standard while everyone else has moved on is exhausting. It isolates you. Most people, myself included, end up adapting anyway because the alternative is constant low-level friction with the world as it currently is. Noticing the drift doesn't automatically give you the energy or the leverage to swim against it. Sometimes the noticing just sits there alongside the acceptance. Again, I keep returning to the same observation. The world and your own life inside it rarely delivers dramatic collapses. It delivers a series of small, almost reasonable adjustments. Each one is easy to live with on its own. Together, they erase the original situation so thoroughly that no one can quite remember when it left. You can notice the pattern, you can name it, you can even resent it, and you can still live inside it because living outside of it would require a different kind of stamina that most of us have on any given day. The frog doesn't jump because the water never feels hot enough in a single moment. The temperature just keeps rising, and the rising itself becomes the ordinary condition. The frog keeps swimming, and most days the water still feels only a little warmer than it did the day before. Everything is acceptable if you do it slowly enough.